Hillary Clinton's trip to Africa wasn't just about diplomacy. It also was about creating new markets for U.S. companies. The U.S. Secretary of State was trying to open doors for such firms as Boeing and Walmart who want to do business in South Africa and other parts of the continent. China is also going after a large piece of the action, and that has set up a rivalry of sorts between Washington and Beijing. So, will African nations reap the economic benefits as the superpowers battle for opportunities? Well, Todd Moss joins us now. He's a vice president and senior fellow at the Center for Global Development here in Washington. Thanks for being here, Mr. Todd.
Thank you.
So your response to that particular question, you're quoted in the New York Times just recently on Secretary Clinton's trip to Africa, saying that the United States is stuck in a bit of a time warp when it comes to Africa. What do you mean, and how does it apply?
Well, I think there's a sense that the United States still views Africa not the way it views other parts of the world, which is a place where we'd engage on mutual security issues and where we'd look to build business and other economic ties to try and trade and have investment. But that Africa is starting to change quite rapidly. 6 out of the top 10 fastest growing economies are in Africa, and the United States is playing a little bit of catch up to try and make sure that that American companies are part of Africa's growth.
You've been studying Africa for many years. What is your interpretation of this particular visit to Africa this time? What is different about it? She went to 11 countries. She went to 9 countries in 11 days, taking with her such companies as Boeing, General Electric, Walmart. What is significant about this?
Well, it's normal on diplomatic missions to have big companies come with you. Most countries do that. I think what's interesting is that I think there's a sense in Africa that some of the attention that Africa had gotten under the previous administration has been lost. Africa hasn't gotten as much of a focus from the U.S. as maybe Africa feels it rightly deserves. And I think the U.S. is just trying to catch up in this big trip at the end of Secretary Clinton's term. It's a signal that they're trying to raise the profile of Africa.
Now, Clinton has been known for her interest in Africa. I mean, even when her husband, the former President Bill Clinton, was in Africa, he did a lot of trips to Africa. Yeah. So outside that, the interest, how about this other speculation, China? The real reason why, America is starting to realize, wait a minute, we're being left behind. We've got no real significant role on the continent.
Yeah, I think it's quite, can be stunning to people when they go and they can see China's obvious presence in Africa. Some of the numbers that they're putting up on big investments in Africa are very, very large. But really, the U.S. and China, with a couple of exceptions, their interests and their objectives in Africa are pretty much aligned. We're both looking to promote economic growth, opportunity, and stability in sub-Saharan Africa. And for the most part, what the U.S. and China are doing in Africa, both economically and on the security side, are quite different and in most ways very complementary. So I think the idea that there's a Cold War competition between China and Africa is really misguided.
But then some would say, just hear into the tone, like Secretary Clinton just made some comments when she was in Dakar, I believe, saying that, the time of taking resources out of the continent and just, literally ripping it apart are over. And that, making that reference to China, China rebuked, saying, you're really misguided there. So is it possible that the two countries can coexist on the continent? And how will Africa itself benefit from that kind of partnership if it can be established?
Well, a little bit of friendly rivalry is fine. I think the issue is how Africa will be able to manage the differing perspectives and objectives sometimes of China and the United States, being able to play us off each other a little bit for their own advantage, which is positive for Africa, keeps us all honest. But really this idea that we need to outcompete China or make sure that the U.S. isn't losing out, I really think it's the wrong way to think about it diplomatically, wrong way to think about it economically. And the oil sector is a good example there. U.S. energy security, Africa is important as a source of U.S. energy, but the global market is so diverse and so fluid that it doesn't really matter who owns what oil. When you fill up your car, it doesn't matter if the oil comes from Nigeria or from Brazil.
I don't mind. All I want to know
is,
is it less? Can I afford it?
Exactly.
Thank you so much. That's Todd Moss, who's joining us, Vice President and Senior Fellow at the Center for Global Development here in Washington. Well, you can stay in touch with In Focus by going to our Facebook page, click like, read our stories, and leave your comments. The address, facebook.com/VOA In Focus.